thank and appreciate you calling this hearing on the impact of rising prices and what the effect they're having on American families. Inflation has been out of control for the past 3 years, and it's having a devastating impact on our country and my state of Alabama. You know, we've got to rein in inflation, or we aren't going to have a middle class left in this country. You know, I want to welcome the Chairman's 3 witnesses. Thank you for coming today. Look forward to visiting with you. I'm honored to have been able to invite a brilliant economist and incredible record of public service to today's panel, former World Bank President and senior Trump administration Treasury official David Malpass, and I look forward to introducing David after sharing some brief observations on the inflation crisis. During President Donald Trump's administration, annual inflation averaged 2.1%. Under President Joe Biden, the annual inflation level has skyrocketed to 5.6%, and inflation has hit a 40-year high. Under President Trump, real wages increased by $4,000. Under President Biden, real wages have decreased $4,200. Gasoline under President Trump's pro-American energy policy averaged $2.58 per gallon. Gas under President Biden has averaged nearly $1 a gallon higher at $3.49. Unlike politicians trying to get reelected, the numbers don't lie. Americans of all backgrounds are struggling, and their struggles show in the data. Credit card debt has soared to a near all-time high of over $1 trillion. American families just can't afford to keep up with skyrocketing prices. Overall, prices have increased 20% under President Biden's leadership. Even if inflation normalizes, those are baked-in price increases that aren't going away. Every American has suffered as a result of the inflation crisis. People of color, single moms, and young folks just starting out have had an especially difficult time in this economic environment. For the average American to afford the same lifestyle they have had at the end of President Trump's presidency, they would need an additional $11,400 per year today just to maintain what they had 3 years ago, $11,000. 2/3 of the Americans are currently living paycheck to paycheck. So, who's to blame for the situation we're in? President Joe Biden and a Congress obsessed with spending money our country doesn't have. The Biden administration has successfully pushed for trillions of dollars in irresponsible deficit spending and dumped fuel on the inflation fire sweeping our country. Clinton Treasury Secretary and Obama Chief Economic Advisor Larry Summers called it right when he said in 2021 that the Biden administration's economic agenda was the least responsible microeconomic policy in decades. The good news for the Americans is that it doesn't have to be this way. There's a game plan that can turn the American economy around, and it has worked before. We're desperately in need of supply-side growth along the lines of what President Reagan brought about in the 1980s. By growing the size of the economy and increasing production of goods and services, President Reagan was successful at turning out of control inflation. The key to igniting the supply-side market response was a tax and regulatory agenda that encouraged economic growth by unleashing the power of the free market system and made America the greatest, most prosperous nation in the world. President Trump built on the Reagan playbook in 2017 when his tax cut package and aggressive deregulatory agenda. As a result of President Trump's pro-growth policies, American prosperity reached new heights, and for the first time in history, blue-collar wages rose faster than white-collar wages. Americans of all colors, creeds, and classes thrived. I look forward to hearing the perspectives of all of our witnesses on the economic challenges facing American children and family. I'm hopeful our discussion today can be the start of something meaningful and a change to turn things around. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, my witness today helped both President Reagan and President Trump craft their winning supply-side economic growth struggles and strategies. He's one of the best economists out there and respected far and wide. David Malpass most recently served as the 13th president of the World Bank, where he focused on increasing economic growth to reduce global poverty. Just prior to this role, Mr. Malpass was nominated by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate as Undersecretary of the Treasury for International Affairs, where he represented the United States at global meetings such as the G7 and G20. In addition to these positions, he spent years as the chief economics of Wall Street giant Bear Stearns. Mr. Malpass also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under President Ronald Reagan, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush, and as Staff Director of the Joint Economic Committee here on Capitol Hill. He earned a bachelor's degree from Colorado College and an MBA from the University of Denver, and he undertook extensive graduate work in economics in Georgetown University. Currently, Mr. Malpass serves as this Distinguished Fellow of International Finance at Purdue University. David joined here today by his wife, Adele, and has a distinguished career on Capitol Hill service herself and now runs the Daily Caller news organization. I'm honored to have David here today as a witness and look forward to his testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Malpass, can a Trump-Reagan-style supply-side economic approach of tax cuts and deregulation ease the current inflation crisis facing our country?
I think the answer is yes. And as we look at regulatory policy, and I addressed this in my remarks, it really matters to the economy how the regulations work and what burdens they put on. What does it cost to comply with the regulations? What do they allow you to do and stop you from doing? One of the examples is this, the natural gas export ban. It changes the world. Do you know what has happened in Europe is it causes them to buy Russian gas under the table, so that the ban on the U.S. export of natural gas helps Russia, and it hurts the job creation in the U.S. On the tax side, the issue, economists think about it as a tax wedge. So if you think of an employer, they employ a worker and pay the worker the gross wages. The worker only receives the net wages. That's the tax wedge. And so as that goes up, then the incentive for the worker is less and the cost, the burden on the employer is more. So the employer employs fewer people. And so as we look out into 2025, really 26, as the Trump tax cuts expire, there's a bigger wedge and that slows down the economy. So you can fix that by thinking about what do you want to do on tax policy that allows incentives, and what do you want to do on regulatory policy to actually permit businesses around the country to produce more.
Talk about the war on fossil fuels. How is that affecting our small businesses and, prices, the rising prices across the country?
In our current system, whether you like it or not, it's the mainstay of how the system operates. It powers the electricity grid, which is so important for manufacturing, for people's homes, and the cost matters a lot. So as you wage a war on fossil fuels, you drive up the prices, and that filters through the whole supply chain. So as we look at it, the U.S. is an energy-rich country, and I think needs to really take advantage of that. We have enough energy in the country stored in the ground and in the nuclear power potential of the country to pay down the national debt, not keep making it larger. So these are key issues for the government to think about, and for the private sector, of course, to be thinking about in whether you want to invest more in the United States, or are you going to go to other parts of the world that are more friendly toward growth in energy supplies. We see it in especially in the electricity projections, with artificial intelligence growing, the internet growing, and the uses for Bitcoin mining, for example, growing. These are all energy intensive, and manufacturing, of course, it's clear the country simply needs a lot more energy and a pathway to get there.
A good friend of mine, Boone Pickens, who I got to know very well through my coaching days out in West Texas, once told me that we had a 300-year supply of natural gas that we knew of. just in this country. We will never run out of it. Do you agree with that?
I think the data, remember the U.S., well, I can recount one. It used to be that the U.S. was thinking about importing natural gas, and there were hubs being set up in the Caribbean to offload natural gas brought from the Persian Gulf, because it's so valuable to people in the U.S. to make fertilizer, to make plastic products. And remember, it's much cleaner on electricity than the alternative, which cleaner, lower carbon intensity than oil and coal. And so it's this giant valuable resource for the U.S. Then when new discoveries were made on how to tap into U.S. natural gas, all of a sudden the U.S. became a giant world exporter. So it proves the value of the resources inside the U.S. and also the value from the climate change standpoint of greenhouse gas emission reduction. It's the way the U.S. has been able to lower. One of the things I saw at the World Bank is on the global stage, people keep having conferences, and what they're looking at is how the rest of the world is going to keep increasing its greenhouse gas emissions, and only the U.S. really has been able to control it. That's largely due to the natural gas resource, which is hugely valuable. One other point is the fertilizer cost. When Russia invaded Ukraine, it cut off natural gas supplies, and that really changed the fertilizer industry. So as we're looking at the famines, and the children and families in Africa, they are suffering massively because specifically of the lack of availability of natural gas for making fertilizer. It's the critical input for that. So as the U.S. thinks about what it wants to do specifically on natural gas, just recognize that it's also the raw material for feeding the world's children. That's a giant capability of the United States, and it's one that I talked about a lot internationally.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ms. Wiggle, thank you for your service, by the way. Mr. Lee, you lost your mind when you went in the restaurant business. I did that while I was coaching. I thought coaching was hard. My gosh, restaurant business is really rough and getting worse. Just a little information. It's going to be harder and harder for food in this country. I'm on the Ag Committee. Last 3 years, we've lost 150,000 farms in this country, and we've lost 25,000 farmers. Regulations, food costs are going to be enormous. It's going to get worse, not going to get better. Mr. Malpas, first quarter growth under the Biden administration was a pitiful 1.4%. As Congress thinks about tax reform next year, which we will have, tax reform after the election, what's the most effective tax cut to get growth moving in the right direction? And why don't we give cuts to people who have kids for child care? I'm all for that. What's your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Senator. Across the economy, people are always looking to have their tax rate lower. That's the old adage of tax the guy behind the tree. Don't tax me. Don't tax the guy behind the tree. And so I want my taxes lower. So as you think about child care, there needs to be considerations of that, and that's part of, I think, the public debate. For me, economics is pretty clear that one function of a tax system is to raise revenue for the government, but to do it in a way that's less distortive. And so that comes back to this idea of a low rate on a broad base. So try to have taxation not be specified, not be narrowed down to certain groups, because it distorts the activity that you end up having on that. So as we look into 2026, you want to have a tax structure that allows small businesses to invest, for example, and that's one of the ideas behind expensing for small businesses of equipment, so that they do buy the new machine that will make their workers more productive, and that way they pay the workers more. And so that's an idea. I think also very important is simply on the income tax side that the brackets stay where they are and the rates stay where they are. That's an extension, and it looks to me like President Biden has included that in his budget proposal for workers below a certain level to keep the rates, knowing that that actually affects their livelihoods, their incentives to work. So as we look historically, the best way to have your tax system is to try to keep away to keep the rates down on as broad a base as you can. One example of that, if I can turn to international, is foreign countries struggling with the value-added tax. We saw over the last month this catastrophe in Kenya where people were actually killed over the proposal of the government to raise taxes. And it goes to this core that when you raise the tax rate to a certain level, people simply won't and can't pay that tax rate. And that was the core of the uprising that occurred in Kenya. The government, I think, correctly decided to pull back from that. It was an IMF-inspired high tax rate regime meant to pay off creditors. So you were having the government take money from poor people to pay to creditors. So they backed off on that, which I was pleased to see. But you ended up with people dead because of this tax policy that was being put in.
I've only got about a minute left here. Just one more question, you, Mr. Maup. You mentioned defending the dollar. What would be the consequences of us losing the dollar, world currency?
We're already seeing some of that. The U.S. doesn't say enough about the importance of the dollar. You don't hear that from the administration, and of it being and the dollar being the mainstay of the world system. So China looks at that and looks to create its own central bank digital currency. So what I mean by defending the dollar is simply having it be stated by the Treasury Department, by the Federal Reserve as they're considering what to do with their policies, that a core part of the U.S. success is having the dollar be a currency that is used around the world and that keeps its value over time. If you lose that, you end up with inflation, for one, which is harmful to children and families, but you also lose the desire to invest into that country. So the U.S. is in an okay position right now because we're chewing through the worst part of this inflation surge. It's devastating, as we've been discussing. But I think there'll be an opportunity in 2025 and 26. If you can increase the production in the economy, the inflation will come down, and then interest rates can fall in the context of defending the dollar.
Thank you. Yeah, just quick. I went July the 4th from cooking steak to chicken this year, as a lot of people did, because it's a lot less price. American people are suffering. Our country's in trouble when it comes to inflation. It all starts with the common folks, people that actually raise the food or actually run the businesses. Small businesses is in trouble. In my state of Alabama, we are struggling big time with the cost of everything. And it starts with fuel, the input cost for farmers, input cost for truckers. The fuel cost of hauling something is almost tripled in cost. And inflation is not going to go down unless we get back to depending on our fuel and our oil and gas in this country. It's not going to happen. We can trick ourselves. It's just not going to happen. But regulation, regulation, regulation. That's all you have to know. Every time I go to a farmer, to a small business, the regulations put on from city to state to county, all the way to federal. It's unbelievable. We need to let people live and make a living. We need to let people do what they need to do to help our country become stronger and stronger. And until we lift these regulations, until we get the federal government out of people's lives, we're not going to have the same country that most of us had a chance to grow up in. So inflation is growing, and it's not going to go anywhere. And I hate it for the American people, and I just hope the people up here in Capitol Hill will get out of the dang way and let people live, put more money back in their pockets so they can take care of their families, and that's all they want. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.